Okay, so now that we have established what exactly emotions are, right? So emotions are these physical sensations that we feel in our body, and we experience them really as either being positive or negative. And then why that's so important, right? Because the more, especially when we're going for a specific goal like weight loss or overcoming emotional eating, if we're experiencing a lot of negative emotions, we're probably going to get negative results. Where if we're experiencing more positive emotions, we're going to get more positive results. And also, it's going to be a more enjoyable journey, right? That's like part of what I'm teaching my clients is that, it doesn't have to be this thing where we're waiting until we get all the weight off to start experiencing these positive emotions. We're actually feeling more joyful along the way, which is why my program is called Joyful Transformation, because we're starting to experience that way before we ever actually get to the final destination, which is a really fun way to do it, right? So once we understand, okay, these emotions are important, and if I'm experiencing more of the positive emotions around my goal, I'm more likely to get to the results that I want. Then the question is, okay, well, what exactly causes my emotions? Because if you're like me, I really didn't know. I just sort of thought like emotions happened to me. And then I would analyze and I would look out into like my life, into the world, and look at the circumstances, the situations, and the people. And I believe that's what was creating my emotions, right? And I think a lot of us are taught this, or we assume this, right? These things out here are causing me to feel a certain way. And there's some things with that can be a little bit of an issue. So I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to give you some examples of where we might start to suspect that there's something else going on here. Because here's the problem. If that's true, if our emotions are important in helping us get our results, and our emotions are completely dependent on external things, then we're kind of in a bad situation, right? Because we don't really have any power. And so what most of us are doing is we're either, if we believe that, we're either trying to change everybody or change our life so that we feel better, which is kind of exhausting, or we're kind of hiding out and trying to avoid all these things because we're afraid of how it's going to make us feel. So I want to talk about maybe there's something else going on where this isn't 100% true, right? It's not just this external world. So I'm going to give you some examples, right? So first of all, the reason I know there's something else going on is that oftentimes our feeling doesn't actually match the reality of the situation. So for example, if you've ever been in a situation like maybe you text your spouse and said, hey, when are you going to be home? And all of a sudden you realize you haven't heard from them. It's been an hour since you text them. They haven't texted you back. It's not like them. What's going on? Oh my word. They're probably in a wreck. They're in a ditch somewhere. They're in a hospital, right? And you're starting to experience this really negative emotion. And then they walk in the door and they're like, oh, sorry, my phone died, right? So this is an example, and you can probably think of a lot of these where we're experiencing an emotion that's not actually matching the reality of the situation. A great one I know a lot of people talk about is like you can be, tucked into your warm, safe bed at night. Your kids are snugly, up in their bed, but you're thinking about something that could happen or something that's scary, and you're then experiencing that negative emotion. Or it could be the opposite. You're thinking about something you're really excited about, a vacation coming up. And even though you're not having that circumstance, you're experiencing a positive emotion thinking about it. So there's a lot of examples of this where what we're feeling isn't actually matching the reality of the circumstance. So that's the first kind of hint that there's something more going on. The second one is that two people or more can experience the exact same situation or exact same encounter with somebody and have a very different emotional response, right? If you have more than one kid, you've probably seen this, right? If you might discipline them the exact same way, but one child's emotional response is going to be very different than the others. One is like, okay, mom, I'm like experiencing the emotion that makes me want to change. The other kid's like, I don't care, right? So we can, again, see a lot of examples of this where people are having the same circumstance or situation or interaction with somebody and having a very different emotional response. So again, there's something else going on. And then the last one, it's actually kind of a part A and a part B, but we can sometimes see a change in how we feel even though the circumstance hasn't changed. So sometimes like we have a very like maybe negative, attitude around our job, and then, something happens and we suddenly feel differently about it, even though the job hasn't changed. Or another way of this is that sometimes we actually do change the circumstance. So we quit our job and we go get a new job, and we find that our emotion actually didn't change, right? Have you ever had this happen when you think, I'm going to be so much happier if I just do this, and then you're not, right? So maybe you're a stay-at-home mom, thinks I'd be happier if I'm working, and then you're working and you don't necessarily feel what you thought you were going to feel, or vice versa. So these are, again, are all sort of like hints or clues of something else going on. And so when we go back and we look at all of those examples that I just gave, what is it ultimately that's driving the emotions in all those situations, all those examples? And really what it comes down to is what you're thinking about the situation or the circumstance or the person, right? It's the way you're thinking about it that's then ultimately creating the emotion. So this, when I learned this was so exciting. It was hard at first because I'm like, no. It's not my thinking, it's the people, it's the situation. But once you really kind of grab onto this, what's so great about this is it's super empowering, right? Because if I can't change these things, then I'm just kind of, I'm kind of at the mercy of it. But if I realize that those things can be what they are, and I can change my thinking about it to then generate a different emotional response, then all of a sudden you start to take your power back, right? And you can decide how you want to think about different situations. And we're not always going to want to think positive, happy things, but when it comes to specifically goals around like weight loss or changing our relationship with food, it's going to serve us to have thoughts that generate those emotions that again create the actions that are going to move us forward. So if we're having a thought that makes us feel bad, what I always tell my clients is, don't get into an argument in your brain about whether the thought is true or not. Just ask yourself, does this thought serve me? And if the answer is no, then I give you permission to just throw it out. I give you permission to not have to think it anymore. And it's really that simple. And you can start to catch your thoughts and start to then determine if they're helpful, and if they're not, you can start to change them. And it's a process and it takes some time, but this is a really, really powerful thing that you can do. So I'm including a worksheet that goes with this that I use with my clients, where you can look at different areas of your life and write down, what are some of your current thoughts about them? How do those thoughts make you feel? And if it's not something that is an emotion that's helping you, then you can decide to either just throw that thought out or even replace it with something that's going to be more helpful, and it's going to help you with generating that emotion. So that's a big piece of it. Now, that's all great, but you might say, yeah, but I don't just overeat when I'm sad. Sometimes I overeat when I'm happy or excited, or sometimes you're just going to experience negative emotion because you're a human being. So what I want to talk about in the last video is how to manage our emotions, all of them, good and bad, without using food as a way to kind of deal with them, right? Because again, that's when we get ourselves into a situation where we're creating results that we don't want. So in the last video, I'm going to talk about how do we then now really manage our emotions in a positive way and get the results that we want, even when we're feeling negative emotions or wanting to use food to manage them. So that's what we'll talk about in the last video. See you there.